I was 40 years old when our quiet life in Florida started to feel slightly different. Not broken, not dramatic, just off in a way I couldn't immediately explain. My wife was 39. We had been married for many years, long enough to move past the illusion of perfect love and into something more realistic: routine, responsibility, trust. We had an 11-year-old daughter, a house in a calm neighborhood, and the kind of life most people would describe as stable. Mornings were predictable, evenings were quiet, weekends were for family. The house next door had been empty for almost 2 years. At first, I kept expecting new owners to show up any day. Then weeks turned into months, and months into years. The for sale sign faded under the Florida sun. The lawn grew wild, and eventually, the house became part of the background, something I stopped noticing entirely. Until one morning, there was a moving truck. A young couple moved in, early 30s, maybe younger. Fit, attractive, full of energy. They smiled easily, waved often, and seemed genuinely happy to be there. I nodded back when I saw them, exchanged a few polite words, and that was it. New neighbors were nothing unusual. At least that's what I told myself. The first changes didn't set off any alarms. My wife simply seemed lighter, more energetic. She started waking up earlier, going outside more often, spending more time in the yard. Florida heat, Florida sun. None of that was strange. People live outdoors here, especially in summer. But gradually, small details began to stand out. She took more care with her appearance during the day. Not dramatically, not suspiciously, just enough to notice. She laughed more. She seemed more relaxed, more present in her body. She started wearing bikini tops around the yard more often, even when she wasn't swimming. I told myself I was reading too much into it. She had every right to feel good about herself. She wasn't doing anything wrong. Confidence isn't a crime. And after years of marriage, maybe I should have been happy to see her feeling alive. Still, something about it felt new. One afternoon, after work, I pulled into the driveway and noticed voices. I looked over and saw my wife standing near the fence, talking to the male neighbor. They weren't close. They weren't touching. Just talking. Laughing. He leaned casually against the fence. She stood relaxed, smiling, completely at ease. It looked innocent. And maybe it was. But the image stayed with me longer than it should have. That evening, everything felt normal. Dinner. Conversation. Our daughter talking about school. My wife didn't act guilty, didn't hide anything, didn't avoid eye contact. If anything, she seemed happier than usual. I didn't bring it up. I trusted her. I still do. She's not the kind of woman who cheats, not secretly, not recklessly. Not with our child living under the same roof. I knew that. Or at least, I believed I did. But belief doesn't always silence instinct. We have security cameras around the house. Nothing extreme. Just standard outdoor cameras for safety. One night, after everyone went to bed, I opened the app. Not because I expected to find anything. Mostly out of curiosity. That's when I noticed something I couldn't ignore. Almost every weekday, when I wasn't home, she was outside. And almost every weekday, he was there too. Same fence, same spot, same relaxed conversations. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing that crossed a clear line. But frequent, consistent, predictable. That's when the feeling changed. Not jealousy, not anger, uncertainty. And once uncertainty settles in, it doesn't leave easily. After that first night of checking the cameras, I told myself I wouldn't do it again. It felt wrong, like I was betraying my own principles. I didn't want to become the kind of man who spies on his own family. Trust had always been one of the foundations of our marriage, and I wasn't ready to throw that away over a feeling I couldn't fully explain. But feelings have a way of coming back. Over the next few days, I started noticing things more clearly. Not just the conversations by the fence, but the timing of them. Almost like a routine, around the same hour, around the same part of the day. When the house was quiet, when I was at work, when our daughter was still at school. I didn't confront my wife. I didn't question her. I just watched. Not through the cameras this time, but through everyday life. She mentioned the neighbors more often, casually, without emphasis. They're nice. They seem happy. They're still unpacking. Nothing suspicious on its own, but repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates space. One afternoon, I came home earlier than usual. I didn't tell anyone. I just wanted to surprise them. When I pulled into the driveway, the yard was empty. No voices, no laughter, just silence. For a brief moment, I felt relief, like maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But that relief didn't last. That night, I checked the cameras again. Same pattern. My wife outside, the neighbor approaching the fence, a long conversation. They didn't touch. They didn't cross boundaries anyone could clearly define. But their body language told a story words didn't. Comfort. Ease. A rhythm that comes from repetition. I found myself pausing the footage, rewinding small moments, not looking for proof of betrayal, but for reassurance. Something to tell me I was wrong. I didn't find it. What bothered me most wasn't jealousy. It was the quiet realization that a part of my wife's daily life existed without me. Not because it had to, but because it wanted to. I started questioning myself. Was I being insecure? Was this just what happens after years of marriage? Had I become too predictable? Too safe? Too boring? At 40, you don't fear competition the way you do at 20. You fear irrelevance. A few days later, I decided to talk to her. Not about the neighbor directly, but about us. That evening, after our daughter went to bed, I asked her if she was happy. Really happy. Not in the polite, automatic way couples answer that question, but honestly. She looked at me with mild surprise. "Of course I am," she said. "Why wouldn't I be?" I asked if she felt fulfilled, if there was anything missing, if she wanted more excitement, more attention, more closeness. I was careful with my words. I didn't accuse. I didn't imply. She listened patiently. Then she smiled and took my hand. "You don't need to worry," she said. "Everything is good. You're overthinking." I wanted to believe her, and in many ways, I did. Then I mentioned the neighbor, casually, lightly, like it wasn't important. "I've noticed you talk to him a lot during the day," I said. "I just wanted to ask, is everything okay there?" She didn't get defensive. She didn't get angry. That almost made it harder. "He's just interesting to talk to," she said. "That's all. It's nothing you need to stress about." Interesting. The word stayed with me long after the conversation ended. That night, lying in bed next to her, I stared at the ceiling and realized something uncomfortable. There was no clear line she had crossed, no rule broken, no betrayal proven, just a growing sense that something was slowly shifting under the surface. And that's the hardest situation to be in. When you have evidence, you act. When you have trust, you relax. But when you're stuck in between, you wait. And waiting, I learned, can be more exhausting than knowing the truth. After that conversation, I tried to force myself back into normalcy. I focused on work, on routines, on being present with my daughter. I laughed at the dinner table, asked about school, listened to my wife talk about her day. On the surface, nothing had changed. And that was the problem. Because beneath the surface, everything felt different. I became more aware of time, of absences, of moments when the house felt too quiet. When I came home and noticed my wife had already showered, already changed, already settled, like she had finished a day that didn't include me. I hated that thought, and I hated myself for having it. The conversations by the fence continued, not every day, not on a strict schedule, just often enough to feel intentional. Sometimes they lasted a few minutes, sometimes much longer, always casual, always relaxed, always just within the boundaries of what could be called harmless. That ambiguity was the worst part. If there had been flirting, I could have confronted it. If there had been secrecy, I could have called it out. But there was neither. Just openness without explanation. One afternoon, I came home early again. This time, I didn't pull into the driveway right away. I stopped a little farther down the street and watched from a distance. I'm not proud of that. But curiosity had turned into something heavier. They were there again. Same fence, same distance, same body language. My wife leaned slightly forward as she spoke. He listened, nodding, smiling. At one point, she laughed, not politely, not briefly, but fully, freely. The kind of laugh you don't fake. I felt a sharp sting of something I hadn't felt in years. Not jealousy, comparison. I realized then that this wasn't really about him. It was about me, about time passing, about aging, about becoming familiar instead of exciting, about being the man who provides stability while someone else provides novelty. That realization sat deep in my chest, uncomfortable and quiet. That evening, I tried to reconnect, not desperately, not obviously. I suggested a walk, a glass of wine, some time together after our daughter went to bed. My wife agreed easily, happily even. Nothing about her behavior suggested distance or guilt. And yet, I felt like I was reaching across a space that hadn't existed before. Later that night, I brought it up again, carefully. "I want to be honest with you," I said. "This whole situation with the neighbor, it makes me uneasy." She looked at me seriously this time. No smile, no dismissal. "Why?" she asked. "Because it's frequent," I said. "Because it's always when I'm not home. And because I don't fully understand what it gives you." She was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke slowly. "I like talking to him," she said. "He's different. That doesn't mean I want anything from him. It doesn't mean I don't love you." I believed her. And yet, the word different echoed just as loudly as interesting had before. I asked her if she would feel comfortable if the roles were reversed, if I spent that much time talking to a young, attractive neighbor while she was at work. She hesitated, just for a second, before answering. "I'd trust you," she said. That hesitation told me more than her words. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I didn't ask her to stop. That would have been easier, but it would have turned the situation into a battle instead of a question. Instead, I made a decision. I would watch. Not obsessively, not suspiciously, but attentively. Because trust doesn't mean blindness. And marriage, I've learned, isn't just about faith. It's about awareness. About noticing shifts before they turn into distances too wide to cross. For now, nothing had crossed the line. But lines don't always announce themselves when they're approaching. Sometimes, they only become visible after you've already stepped too close. After that second conversation, I stopped looking at the cameras altogether. Not because the situation had resolved itself, but because I understood something important. Watching footage wouldn't give me clarity. It would only feed my doubts. And doubts, once given too much attention, have a way of becoming something else. Life continued. Mornings still started the same way. Breakfast, school drop-offs, work. Evenings were filled with familiar routines: dinner, homework, quiet conversations before bed. From the outside, nothing had changed. Our family still looked whole, still functioned, still felt normal. And maybe it was. But inside me, a quiet awareness had settled. Not panic, not suspicion, just a heightened sense of attention. like standing in a room with a window open. You don't feel cold, but you notice the breeze. The conversations by the fence didn't stop. They also didn't escalate. That, in some ways, was even more unsettling. There was no dramatic moment, no argument, no discovery that forced action. Just time passing, familiarity growing, comfort settling in places where it hadn't existed before. One afternoon, I watched my wife walk back into the house after one of those conversations. She wasn't hiding anything. She didn't rush. She didn't avoid eye contact. She kissed me like she always did when I came home. And yet, I found myself wondering what parts of her day I no longer fully knew. That thought stayed with me. Marriage, I realized, isn't broken by betrayal alone. Sometimes it's challenged by proximity, by the slow introduction of another presence, not as a threat, but as an alternative. Someone who listens without history, without shared responsibility, without the weight of years. I trusted my wife. I still do. But trust doesn't cancel awareness. And love doesn't mean ignoring the subtle shifts in the dynamic between two people who've shared a life for over a decade. I chose not to confront further, not because I was afraid, but because there was nothing concrete to confront. No accusation would have been fair. No demand would have been justified. Instead, I focused on what I could control: being present, being engaged, being attentive. I made more space for us, not aggressively, not out of fear, but intentionally. Conversations without distractions, time without routines, moments that reminded us who we were before life became predictable. She noticed. I could tell. And maybe that was enough. Or maybe it was just a pause. That's the thing about situations like this. You don't get clear answers. You don't get clean endings. You live in the in-between, in the place where trust and doubt coexist without canceling each other out. For now, I chose to believe her, but I also chose to stay alert. Not because I expected betrayal, but because relationships don't fall apart in a single moment. They shift, quietly, gradually, almost politely. And by the time something becomes obvious, it's often already too late to change the direction it's been heading. So I watched. I listened. I paid attention. Not like a suspicious husband, but like a man who understood that love requires more than faith. It requires presence. Nothing had happened, but something had changed. And sometimes, acknowledging that is the most honest ending a story can have. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It really helps the channel grow.